Hello, house. It's just me and you today. James is at work, where he makes money. I sometimes do that too. Do you know what money is, house? You don't? How silly of you. Money is... How can I explain this in a way that makes sense to a house? You know how we fill you up with water? And you know how we use that water when I've gone into the bathroom and taken a massive, steaming...
Walt.
House?
It is once again time for Command 0.
Have you learned to play Commander, House? This is great. I'm calling James right now.
Initiate teleportation sequence.
Oh, it's the Space Commanders. Wait, I'm in the middle of a very important conversation. No, you're not taking me. No, save me, House. Quick, trap me under the sink like you did the other day. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast. It's the GCP brought to you by POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast. We're all uniting forces to help you to have better games of Commander. I'm your host, Walt. Today, the Lone Free Ranger. I'm the type of guy who likes to roll around. That's a Chicken Run reference. If you didn't, I don't know, if you're not an Aardman fan like me, yeah, that's what the Lone Free Ranger comes from. Anyway, we know the drill. I've been abducted on my own, which means I have an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
Walt, alongside James, you have advocated for structured Rule Zero conversations to ensure balanced games of Commander. Once again, we require an extensive example of a deck description for our database. Provide Command 0 for your deck constructed around Gandalf the White.
Okay, so this has happened before. This is my second time being abducted on my own. James has been abducted once. Not fair, but I'm sure he'll get to happen himself as well at some point. Yeah, the Space Commanders want to understand Rule Zero a bit better, and they want to learn that through the lens of me talking about one of my decks. So I've been abducted. I don't get to go back to Earth until I've given the best Rule Zero description of my Gandalf the White deck that I possibly can. Of course, this isn't going to be a representation of how I would personally conduct a Rule Zero conversation, because I don't want to bore the people that I play with a 30-minute description of my deck and how it works and why it wins. But we've got a bit of time, and the Space Commanders want to know everything, and I'm sure you might want to know more about this deck that I've played many, many times on our stream, twitch.tv/getcommanded, if you haven't checked that out before. It's a deck that I absolutely adore, so I can see why they've tasked me with talking about this one. But one thing at a time. We should talk about what Rule Zero is. I know it comes up all the time on this podcast, but I'm just going to have a quick refresher. Rule Zero is otherwise often known as the pre-game discussion. We sort of use the term Rule Zero in the way that most of the player base does, which is that Rule Zero is this sort of catch-all term for everything that you talk about before the game of Commander actually starts. According to the Commander Rules Committee, this is also where we would discuss whether illegal cards will be allowed. You know, I'm going to Rule Zero this commander that doesn't exist to be my commander for this game. Whether proxy cards are okay, and how mulligans will be resolved. But for most of the player base, I think, when we say Rule Zero, we mean that crucial discussion of what power level people want in the game that we're about to play. So it's the discussion of, okay, I'm going to play this Nekusar Wheels deck. This is how it's going to kill you, and then it'll let someone else pull out a deck that's of an appropriate power level, so we can all have a better game as a result. Here at Get Commanded, of course, we don't like the 1 to 10 power level scale that a lot of people use. This is the classic every deck is a 7 thing that comes up all the time. We find that, basically that using numbers for this is not effective. It's extremely subjective. It's open to interpretation, and people can just often be misled. Someone who knows a lot about the game might describe their deck as a 7 because they can see that it's a lot less powerful than a CEDH deck. And someone who doesn't know much about the game might describe their deck as a 7 because they go, well, for precons a 5, I've put 10 new cards in, so it's a 7 now. You can see that those two players sitting down at a pod together are likely to have a bad time because those two decks are probably not equivalent to one another. So we, instead, at Get Commanded, highly recommend using our template. 3 questions with a bonus sort of 4th question that's less relevant today. The 3 questions being, how does your deck win? What are the win cons? How does it bring the game to an end? How consistently does it win? Or how is your deck consistent? What parts of your deck increase the consistency of it? And how does your deck stop its opponents from winning the game? So this is where you would highlight whether your deck has 20 board wipes in it, or 30 bits of targeted removal, or, stacks. Stacks is a thing some people like to do that the rest of us don't. I'm one of those people who likes to do it. Don't tell anybody. Well, sometimes. Only in CDH. It's different there. The bonus 4th question there, of course, is how much experience do you have playing Commander? This is also just a really great way to get to know someone who you haven't played Commander with before. If someone says, I've been playing for a year, you're going to adjust your expectations quite a lot compared to someone who says, I've been playing since EDH was invented. I was back there in the back of that GP Vegas when they invented it. That's a different kind of person you're expecting to play with there. So how does your deck win? How is it consistent? How does your deck stop its opponents from winning? Those are the 3 questions that I am going to be trying to answer today to hopefully earn my place back on planet Earth, because I like it there with all of you. You're quite nice. Have I said that to you before? I'm going to say it to you now. You're quite nice. Anyway, let's move on. The background of this deck, Gandalf the White, is of course a mono white commander. This has sort of formed part of my project to build a single color deck in every color. I built my Mowu Loyal Companion deck first. That's a mono green list. And then I wanted to build a mono white deck. It was actually a goal for this year that I set myself, believe it or not. I am that much of a dweeb. So this was my attempt at mono white. I haven't gone any further than that, but I'm intending on building a blue deck and a black deck and a red deck eventually. But specifically this deck is kind of the result of a golem list that I used to play. I think it's still up on my Moxfield profile. This was my Ishtakik and Rebek Selesnya golem list. Very weird. Don't recommend playing artifacts in 2 colors that are bad at playing artifacts, but here we are. Anyway, but I sort of got more inspired by this Gandalf the White that I pulled in a pack and decided to transform it into that. So I should probably tell you what Gandalf the White does, shouldn't I? That would be kind of relevant to this podcast. So Gandalf the White, for 3 white, he is a 4/5 legendary creature, avatar wizard with flash. You may cast legendary spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. And if a legendary permanent or an artifact entering or leaving the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So basically, there are some legendary permanents in this deck. I think I've got 2 legendary things with ETBs or LTBs, enter the battlefield, leave the battlefield effects. Mostly we're just dealing with artifacts that have really great enter the battlefield or leave the battlefield triggers, because basically Gandalf will double them. He also gives them flash, which is really handy, and he himself has flash. That's quite nice. But mostly it's the fact that he's doubling the triggers. So we're sort of building our deck around the fact that creatures or artifact creatures or just artifacts in general that enter the battlefield, cause something to trigger, leave the battlefield, cause something to trigger. Gandalf's going to double all that, and that's probably going to get us over the line. Honestly, probably the most fun part of this deck is the fact that it gives all of my key pieces flash. It means I can sort of sneak into a commanding board state at the latest possible moment, and I can hold up answers for most of the game. It's very easy to hold up a generous gift when you wanted to flash in your 3 mana, a card. Think of a card for 3 mana. I was going to flash that in, and instead I cast Generous Gift. It feels pretty good. I've got multiple options because things have flash. I will say that in terms of the price of this deck, compared to my other decks, this deck is not as budget friendly. It comes in at $210 US according to Moxfield. That's using Card Kingdom prices. But that said, you could very easily copy my list, cut 8 to 10 of the most expensive cards and sub in some cheaper stuff, and you could play a really, really great version of this deck for 150 USD, I would say. But yes, it's not my most budget of decks. It's mostly just because of cards I've happened to accrue over the years. But that's where it's pulled in at, $210 US. Anyway, Rule 0. First question. How does the deck win? There are two sort of ways that I would say this deck tends to get over the line. And I'm going to sort of colloquially call them the fast way and the slow way. White is very good at going slow, as we'll discover, but there is a fast way as well. The fast way is to have things with big enter the battlefield effects. Gandalf will copy any of these enter the battlefield effects that come on an artifact. So for example, a card that's part of my winning board set a good chunk of the time is Mere Battlesphere. We all know it. It's the 7 generic 4/7 artifact creature Mere construct. Enters the battlefield, it creates 4 1/1 colourless Mere artifact creature tokens, and whenever Mere Battlesphere attacks, you may tap X untapped Mere you control, and if you do, Mere Battlesphere gets +X/+0 until end of turn, and deals X damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking. So yeah, we're going to double that ETB and get 8 Mere instead of 4, typically, most of the time. And so we're going to be giving it +8/+0 when it attacks and dealing 8 to the defending player. Honestly, the burn damage over the top tends to be the thing that gets me there most of the time. But yeah, this is a very common win con in this deck. You can flash it in, you're going to get twice as many Mere, and there's ways to make it even more crazy later. I will also shout out Mere Battlesphere's new younger brother, Threefold Thunderhulk. This is the one from Lost Caverns of Ixalan that makes gnomes. But it also makes gnomes when it attacks, and it's a sack outlet for artifacts. So it's kind of got a bit of utility. Probably not quite as good as Mere Battlesphere in the deck, but still very, 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 very good for 7 generic mana. You can also get even more of those great ETBs if you use the sleeper card in my deck. I think this card should be played maybe slightly more, but that said, it's just very good in specifically this deck. Mirrorworks. This, I believe, had its first printing... No, that's wrong. Disregard. Mirrorworks, for 5 generic, you get an artifact that says, whenever another non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 generic mana. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that artifact. So really importantly, Gandalf actually copies this Mirrorworks enter the battlefield trigger, because when that non-token artifact enters the battlefield, Mirrorworks will trigger twice. So you do have to pay 2 generic mana twice. You have to pay 4. But now you can theoretically cast a Mere Battlesphere for 7, pay 4 generic mana, and you get 2 more Mere Battlespheres, and then there's 3 Mere Battlesphere ETBs on the stack, and Gandalf doubles all of them. So you'll end up with 24 Mere and 3 Mere Battlespheres. Crazy stuff. There's other things you can do with Mirrorworks specifically that tend to work out really well. Token copies of stuff can be sacrificed, and they remember their mana value. That's very relevant in this deck. But yeah, Mirrorworks, absolutely a staple of this deck. That's the fast way of winning the game. Big ETBs, copying them, making them happen multiple times, sacking stuff, that kind of thing. The slow way of winning, which has also probably been the way I've won more often, is just attrition. White in Commander is really great at grinding out a slow win by depleting all of your opponent's resources with removal, with dealing incremental damage, until every single one of your opponents is dead. In my deck, there are 3 board wipes and a bunch of ways to make sure that we come out on top after the board wipe resolves. So for instance, we can blow everything up and then we can cast Faith's Reward. This is the instant for 3 and a white that says return to the battlefield all permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So basically, your Wrath of God, destroy all the creatures, You face reward afterwards. You get all your stuff back. Nobody else gets their stuff back. That can be a win on its own. And in a very long game, we also have the card Brilliant Restoration. This is the 7 mana sorcery that just returns all of your artifacts and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So yeah, we're very good at sacrificing artifacts because we want leave the battlefield triggers will happen twice as well with Gandalf. So yeah, ETBs, LTBs, sack a bunch of stuff, and then we can bring it all back with Brilliant Restoration. Also, if the game goes really long, I can't lie and say that I've ever won with this card before, but I really, really want to. Millennium Calendar. For 1 generic mana, you get a legendary artifact that says whenever you untap 1 or more permanents during your untap step, put that many time counters on the Millennium Calendar. You can pay 2 generic and tap it to double the number of time counters on the Millennium Calendar. And when there are 1,000 or more time counters on the Millennium Calendar, sacrifice it and each opponent loses 1,000 life. A very, very funny ode to the old Mayan calendar, the world's gonna end at the end of 2012 kind of thing. Very funny, very silly. I haven't won with it before, but I don't really think that this card is particularly crazy good in my deck, but someday I'll win with it, and it's a very fun turn 1 play to get out and just sort of say to your opponents, eventually, maybe, I might deal 1,000 damage to you. I really want to get there someday with the deck. I haven't yet, but yes, the slow way. Attrition, Millennium Calendar is the way to go. Second question of our Rule 0 template is, how is the deck consistent? What makes the deck consistent? The main things we highlight in this question are usually card draw, ramp, and tutors. Tutors being especially one that has a big effect on the consistency of a deck. There are 2 tutors in my deck, one of which is way better than the other. Oswald Fiddlebender has been built around in this deck, and I'll explain why. For 1 and a white, you get a 2/2 legendary creature. He's a gnome artificer, and you can pay a white and tap Oswald Fiddlebender, sacrifice an artifact, and search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle, activate only as a sorcery. So this is kind of what we would call a pod effect after the card. Oh my gosh. Shows how much Magic I play that's not Commander. There is a card, something pod, that's not coming to me right now. Blood pod? Is that right? Tell me if I'm wrong in the comments, gang. Anyway, you get an artifact that's 1 bigger than the one you sacrifice, and you can do it every turn. The card is a real build around, but in the right deck, it's really outstanding. I've built my curve all the way up to the 9 mana Phyrexian Triniform, which is a win con on its own, by the way, in the deck. This is the 9 mana 9/9 that when it dies, it creates 3 colorless golem artifact creature tokens. They're Phyrexian now. That's been errated. And you can encore it for 12 generic mana, so you make a token copy that attacks each of your opponents. Then when all of those die, they trigger and make a bunch more golems. Of course, this is a leaving the battlefield trigger, and so Gandalf will copy it. But anyway, we were talking about Oswald Fiddlebender. So yeah, I had to build a curve in this deck to make sure that I could go incrementally up my mana curve all the way so I can sacrifice something every turn. And there are loads of choices, especially in the low mana value slots, so that Oswald can pretty much always find me something that I need. You know, if I sacrifice a 2 mana artifact and I'm looking for 3 mana artifacts, you know, I can get a 3 mana artifact that ramps me. I can get a 3 mana artifact that kind of draws me a card. I can get a 3 mana artifact that is removal. It's flexible, is the really great thing about Oswald Fiddlebender as a tutor. You can find something and put it straight on the battlefield every turn. The other tutor in my deck is Inventor's Fair. This is the land where if you have 3 or more artifacts, you can sacrifice it and search your library for an artifact card and put it into your hand. You have to pay 4 generic mana, tap it, and sacrifice it as well. Very slow. Obviously, you have to go down a land and pay effectively 5 mana to actually crack your Inventor's Fair and go get something. But in the right circumstances, this can find that one missing piece of your board state, or sometimes just the win. Otherwise, in terms of consistency, those are the only tutors in my deck. But believe it or not, my mono-white deck is actually quite good at drawing cards. It's stacked with card draw. Gandalf makes really great use of artifacts that ETB or LTB and draw a card. So we're playing a whopping 21 ways to draw cards in my deck. Obviously, once Gandalf comes out, a lot of them become a lot better. So a card like Lembas, which is, sees some play in some formats sometimes, but is certainly not a powerhouse, becomes much stronger when you do it twice with Gandalf. I believe Lembas says when it enters the battlefield, you scry 1 and draw a card. So doing that twice is actually pretty strong, especially for 2 mana. So Gandalf is very good at doubling those abilities, but you also have to hit land drops and get to Gandalf in the first place. So that's why there's so many bits of card draw in my deck. How does my deck stop my opponents from winning? This is question number 3 of our template. Well, white is the color of answers, and we've got absolutely tons of them in my deck. There are 12 pieces of removal in my deck, including staples like Swords to Plowshares, Disenchant, but I'm also playing maybe my new favorite card, Comeuppance. Love this card. For 3 and a white, it's an instant that says, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you and planeswalkers you control this turn by sources you don't control. If damage from a creature source is prevented this way, Comeuppance deals that much damage to that creature. If damage from a non-creature source is prevented this way, Comeuppance deals that much damage to the source's controller. So basically what's happening is for 4 mana, we are fogging, we're preventing all the damage that's going to be dealt to us this turn. But importantly, Comeuppance, appropriately with the name, deals all that damage back again. So if someone's trying to cast a lightning bolt on you and you Comeuppance, they take 3. If someone's attacking you with a 10-10 and you Comeuppance, I think the creature takes 10, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, deals that much damage to that creature. So you can kind of board wipe one of your opponents sometimes on the right board state and at the right time with Comeuppance. I think it's especially good in this deck because our whole deck can be played at flash speed. So we're very capable of leaving up 4 mana every turn cycle, just in case. There are decks that are not so good at leaving up 4 mana. It kind of feels pretty bad to have 4 mana open and to kind of take your full turn off. But because we play at flash speed, it means that, worst comes to worst, you can just drop a Solemn Simulacrum on the end step before your turn and ramp twice, in this case, with Solemn rather than cast your Comeuppance. So you can kind of leave it up for multiple turns of the game and not feel forced to use it like some decks will when they leave mana open. In terms of stopping my opponents, I also want to highlight a card that's really good at stopping my opponents from stopping me, I guess. The stopping of stopping. I want to shout out this criminally underplayed card. Cannot believe it is still only $1. Fanatical Devotion. For 2 and a white, it's an enchantment that says, sacrifice a creature, regenerate target creature. I love you. Cards printed in 2000. Isn't that such a beautiful line of text? So simple, so short. Yeah, it's a sack outlet. It's great for sacrificing stuff that you want to bring back from the graveyard anyway, but also just regenerating stuff can get around so much of the removal that your opponents are likely to cast against you. Obviously, it does nothing to someone trying to exile something. There are certain board wipes like Wrath of God that say destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. That's going to stop it. But so much of the time I found that just having a Fanatical Devotion on my battlefield means that people don't even try to remove my stuff because they know it's going to blanket. And sometimes even a board wipe. Someone tries to cast, a Blasphemous Act, and you have 10 creatures, you sacrifice 5 of them, keep the other 5. Feels very good to survive a board wipe in that way. I do want to highlight one more card here in terms of stopping my opponent from winning. I don't think it's very good at that. I think I just wanted to shout out this one flavor card in the deck. For flavor reasons, I'm playing the card, You Cannot Pass! It's an instant for a white mana that says, destroy target creature that blocked or was blocked by a legendary creature this turn. I dream of the day that I can say you cannot pass in that goofy voice like I just did. I am aware that the line in the film is you shall not pass, but in the book he says both, and I think even in the film he might say both. I think he says you cannot pass, and then he says you shall not pass. Anyway, very flavorful. I think it's a pretty bad card. I want to be on the record saying that, but I dream of the day that I do get to go full Ian McKellen on somebody. It will happen. I'm guaranteeing it. Look, My Gandalf the White list is one of my all-time favorite decks. The lines of play are interesting and dynamic. Even the thinking involved in your Oswald Fiddlebender sacrifices and fetches can keep you on your toes. Also, unlike some of my other goofy brews, this deck is very, very consistent. And getting to play at instant speed all game gives you the ability to sneak a win out of nowhere. Mono White cops a lot of criticism in the MTG community, and some amount of that is justified. But there is nothing like the feeling of invincibility you acquire when your white deck creates a completely impenetrable shield. So, Space Commanders, command received. All right, to listeners, do you feel commanded? What do you think of my Gandalf the White deck? And are you sick of me playing it on stream yet? I won't blame you if you are. I've played it a bunch of times, but I just love it. It's so much fun. You can get in touch with me and James when he returns via your social media platform of choice at Get Commanded everywhere. Or you can talk to us live in the chat of our Twitch channel when I next play my Gandalf the White deck. It's only a matter of time. Twitch.tv/GetCommanded. And you can then watch that content on YouTube if you can't tune in live. But we do stream every Monday night, 7 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time. Of course, the best way to support Get Commanded is over on Patreon. It's linked in the show notes. It's truly the reason that we're able to release this content so consistently and investigate all of the cool new stuff that we're doing these days. So we'd like to thank our patrons, Fuzzy, Bottomless Potamus, Dyer, Dylan Norg, Bertie, Crazy Logic, and Benjamin. And an extra special shout out goes to Fletcher Cutting and Wizard Down Under, who support us in the Space Commander tier. You guys are the best. We also need to thank Palms Off Gaming, who sponsor this podcast. They make some really outstanding deck boxes, sleeves, binders, and other gaming accessories. You can check them out at palmsoffgaming.com.au/#GetCommanded, and you can receive a 10% discount off your next purchase and support us directly at the exact same time. That's palmsoffgaming.com.au/#GetCommanded. Oh, I think the lights are starting to dim above me. I think I'm going back to Earth. Oh, I'm back. That's nice. This is my room. This is the house. Hi, house. The house is not talking to me. Probably offended. James will be back next week, of course, for some more fun. And we'll see you next Friday for another transmission from the Space Commanders. Goodbye, Commander players.